My name is Joey Fameli. I'm one of the video enthusiasts here at Tested, and today I'm going to take you along my journey of glass. That's right, today I'm going to be talking about cinema lenses. You saw me talk about the Atlas anamorphic cinema lenses not too long ago. Years ago, I reviewed the Fujinon, the MK Zoom cinema lenses, but today I'm going to be talking about a Micro Four Thirds native cinema lens line by SLR Magic called the SLR Magic MicroPrime Cine lenses. Now, being that these are Micro Four Thirds are important because I am a GH5 shooter. GH5 Mark II I use, GH5S. I sort of live in that ecosystem quite a bit because a lot of the work I do, a lot of the docu-style, run and gun, travel work I do requires smaller setups. And I was looking for something native to that lens mount so that I could have smaller glass. Now, SLR Magic sent me this lens pack to review. At the time, I had the GH6, but that camera has gone back to Panasonic. That was a review unit that I had for a little over a month to play around with. So a lot of this footage you're gonna be seeing is a combination of the GH6 and the GH5 Mark II. It's all Micro Four Thirds. It's all 4K, 10-bit vlog recording, then graded, but it's gonna be mostly those two cameras as that is sort of what I had my eye on these lenses for, was for that camera system. When it comes to my personal gear for shooting handheld, shooting personal projects, or rigging it up for cinema style stuff or narrative stuff, I tend to go through a few different stages. When I'm doing travel work, I tend to use the Lumix lenses. These are just like zoom lenses. I have like the 12 to 100 essentially on two different lenses. So it gives me a great big range. It's a pretty sharp image, very nice contrast. The lens flares are very minimal. And so it's a very good all-in-one camera lens. And that is like my travel camera for whatever, for run and gun docu-style stuff. But when I want to do interviews or something with a little more of a cinematic flair to it, I tend to use what's called the MetaBones adapter, which is a lens adapter that sits on the end of my camera. It optically changes the lens from Micro Four Thirds to a Canon EF. And then for that, I use the Rokinon Cine lenses on that setup. But you can see they're quite bigger. The Canon, these are full frame cinema glass lenses. You can see that they much heavier and much bigger than the Lumix lenses, the Micro Four Thirds glass. So I use this on very specific things, especially when I'm doing like narrative work. I will rig this whole thing up and swap these lenses out because they are built as cinema style lenses. So they have a lot of tools. They declicked iris ring and focus ring, all the rings being in the same spot. So my follow focus rigs can sit on quite comfortably. And it allows me to do much more controlled work when it comes to cinema style productions. Now, one of the reasons I've been looking outside of the Rokinon ecosystem is because I've been using these lenses for like a long time on a lot of different projects, and the flaws are starting to bug me. There's a number of things that are characteristics of these lenses that don't really match up with my style of shooting. That, and again, the size of them, the weight being that they are full frame Canon style lenses, I don't need that. I wanted something lightweight, something that looks great, all the way through the entire range of the iris, and is portable enough to throw in a small travel case when I want to bring prime lenses out on location to another country or doing any kind of run and gun style work. That is where the SLR Magic lenses came in. These are budget cinema lenses. You can also get them in the E-mount. I don't use Sony's personally. We use Sony's at the office, but I tend to use Micro Four Thirds for a lot of my narrative work. And so I got the Micro Four Thirds, which range, they are considered budget cinema lenses. They run about the same price of the Rokinons. You're looking at about $400 bucks per lens. So you can get an entire set for $1,200, $1,600 and give you a wide array of options to work with. Now the range for this SLR Magic Cine lens set range from the 10mm, which I believe is a newer lens, then we get to a 17, a 25, a 50, and a 100. Now remember, this is Micro Four Thirds GH5 cropped, and so you get a 2x crop factor. So if you're used to using full frame cameras, think of these as double. So the 10 is really a 20, the 25 is a 50, the 50 is my 100. And then the 35 is my 70. Now, before when I wanted to go wide, I either have my still lens for the GH5 or I have this Rokinon 7.5mm Cine lens, which it gets into fisheye territory. You're getting into Beastie Boys music video stuff. It's a very soft lens. It doesn't really look super sharp all the way through, especially wide open or especially closed up. There's like a middle ground that it looks okay in. It's very hard to put ND filters on this, and consumer cameras don't have ND fillers built in much besides the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera Pro. So you need to start thinking about filtration, especially when it comes to ND for some of these Cine lenses, because if you want to have a controllable cinema image, you're going to need to have control of your exposure index. You're going to need to have control of the NDs so that you can stop out light. A matte box solves all this. When you have a matte box mounted on the end, you can throw in your 4x5s or 4x4 filters and cut down that light so that you can stick with your 180-degree shutter and the aperture and iris that you would like to use, same with the shutter speed. But with these Rokinons, they're a little bit, at least the set that I have, they're a little bit all over the place. None of the ring diameters really quite match, so I can't get one screw-on variable ND filter to match along all of them. This one is like a bulbous shape, so it doesn't really fit ND filters. The SLR Magic, on the other hand, is built, because I think it's built as a Micro Four Thirds sensor, it's a lot less glass. And so it is much easier for this company to put together these lens sets, almost identical in shape, size, and weight. All the rings, all the focus rings, they're all declicked like most cinema lenses are, and they all line at the exact same spot. So when I use a follow focus rig, I tend to use this, this Tilta follow focus gear that just locks onto the lens and allows me to either attach a snake and rack focus or manually do focus. But because it is, those rings are all in the same spot, that means that I don't have to move this around the rails. It just sits in one spot. I lift it out when I do a lens swap and I punch it in. It's going to be in the exact same spot. Same with the focus rings. They're always going to be in the same spot because of the size of these lenses. The Rokinon also has that, but the height, the length of the lenses are all different. And so that's okay when you're using focus rings, but when you put a matte box on, like I just said, sometimes I like to use a matte box so I can swap out 4x5s of filters into this matte box. But because when I switch lenses from the 35 to the 135, for example, I'm gonna have much more lens, so that I have to move that entire matte box. And it kind of slows things down. The SLR Magic, being that smaller glass, they all sit at the exact same height. And so everything, all your accessories on your rig are going to match correctly. Now, this isn't a review knocking the Rokinons or comparing them. I know I'm leaning on the comparison here, but that's because they're both in the same price range. They're both sort of consumer cinema lenses. Cinema lenses can get pretty expensive, and $400, $500 is not a whole lot for these cinema lenses. So I feel like they do kind of occupy the same footprint in the marketplace. And so I think it is worth just talking about each of them, because I do know a lot of other GH5 users that use the Metabones adapter and use the Rokinons as their cine lenses. But what I wanted in this video was really show you that there are native options. Now, the build quality of the SLR Magic is probably the first thing that jumps out at me. It's metal and glass. I'm used to the Rokinons, which is mostly plastic bodies, might be plastic elements inside, I'm not sure. It's not uncommon, but it's a very delicate feeling lens. These feel very sturdy and somewhat weatherproof. And the etching on the feet in focus and the iris is really nice. It's missing meters. Usually these come with feet and meters. These have feet. And then the declicked, of course, all the rings are declicked. And you're ranging from 1.4, this is a 50 millimeter I'm holding here, it opens up to 1.4 and down to 16. Some of these range 1.5 to 16 on the 17 millimeter, and then 2.1 for like the 10 millimeter. But most of them run at about 1.5 with the exception of that 10 millimeter. Now, another big thing to look at when you're looking at cinema lenses is that focus rotation. Still lenses have a very small focus rotation, meaning that like when I'm trying to grab focus from one thing to another, it's a very small turn and that focus throws out. With cinema lenses, it's all about control, like I said. And so you want to have a lot of room of leeway to pull and move and bring your focus in and out and have a lot of room in that movement so you're not overshooting. Most lenses run at somewhere in the 200-degree range. When I reviewed the Fuji MK cinema lens, that was a Sony E-mount, it was about 200 and something. And it was a little bit too much because when you get into the 200 range, the SLR Magics, there are 150 degree focus rotation, going from the very furthest to the very closest. And that is great for a single man band. That is great for one shooter to be rolling focus. But when you start to get to 200, you're starting to have a little bit more of a turn than you would need. It's great when you have someone running follow focus. If there's someone on a remote focus head and they are grabbing your focus for you, having all that extra room is fantastic. But being able to have that little bit shorter focus throw, but not so short that it's like the still lenses where you're overshooting, is good. I think 150 is a good sweet spot for single person shooters. Anything above that works out really well when you have an AC or somebody, a focus puller, helping you out on that focus. Another big plus with having these lenses be the same size, roughly the same weight, is that when you are switching these cameras to gimbals and off things that need to have some kind of counterbalance calibration, these lenses won't change much of that. I've used the Rokinons on, say, things like Ronins, and you have to, every time you add a new size lens on to the camera mount, you have to recalibrate it, make sure the counterbalance is perfect so that that gimbal doesn't just fall flat. With the SLR Magics, everything being the same size, that means you don't need to do much readjustment at all. You just swap lenses and you're good to go. So these not only take up less room in your bag, they're a little bit lighter, but they also just help rigging things like that, where it's not techno cranes, but small crews, small skeleton crews using things like Ronins allow them to work quickly and work more efficiently than having to spend time recalibrating things every time you change out a lens. And finally, image quality. Of course, that's a huge important aspect of lenses, is how the image looks to the camera. Now, I've seen people say that it looks soft about 1.5, 2.0, and it looks really sharp at 4. I think that's somewhat true. I think these lenses look much sharper throughout the entire range than the Rokinons. Going back to the flaws that I've learned to work with on the Rokinons is that, yes, they are very fast lenses. They all open to like 1.5 or so, but they all look very soft at 1.5. The softer, I'm okay with some soft images, but softer than I would like. And also they introduce color fringing. I get like chromatic aberration sometimes. I get these purples that are starting to pull out of the edges. It's stuff that's not really pleasing to me, and so I tend to always shoot Rokinons out of 4. I actually have no problem shooting the SLR Magic wide open. I saw very little, if any, color fringing happening at that wide open. Some softness in the center, which is not really what you want, but it was like not enough to be noticeable. I tended to shoot wide open on these because I did really like the image that I was getting from those. I liked the bokeh that these produced. I liked that creaminess of the background. It all looked really nice to me. The Rokinons can tend to go a little bit too much, especially with that color fringing. Your bokeh start to spread out. Things start to look a little weird. The SLR looked really nice wide open. However, one thing that I noticed very big on the SLR Magics was the lens flaring. Lens flaring can be a characteristic, can be a feature or a bug, depending on how you look at it. Some people really like a certain amount of flares. Now, when I am panning these cameras around, when I have a lens on this thing and I'm moving it around and it catches light in certain ways, it has a very nice, almost reminiscent of like an anamorphic flash here and there that just splits across the screen. It's not an anamorphic lens, it's spherical, so you're not getting that from it, but you are getting the elements are catching that light in a specific way. It looks really nice. That happens about 30% of the time. The other 70% of the time, when light hits these things, it flares out pretty rough and you start to lose contrast and become sort of a dreamy image. And this can be controlled with a matte box. I definitely recommend using some kind of matte box either on the edge of these lenses, because these lenses, being that they're all pretty comparable in size, they all, I think, roughly have 85 millimeter diameter ends. So you can get one of those lock-on matte boxes to go across all your lenses, and then they use 82 millimeter thread. So you can buy your 82 millimeter ND if you want, or put a matte box on the edge, or do like I do and use a rail system with a matte box that comes in and out. Either way, you do want to look at the flares of these lenses if you're going to be investing in them and see if that's something you want, and then see if it's something you can control with a matte box. Now, testing out spherical lenses has been interesting. Now, working with the anamorphics, it's easy enough for me to look at the anamorphics, see these very pronounced characteristics, and call them out as either I like them or I don't, and how was this thing to work with. With sphericals, it's much more different. You're looking at nuanced aspects of these lenses, depending on what you want from your image. Learning how to use these and shoot with them and test them and find those out has been a little bit tricky, and I actually did speak with a couple DPs. You'll see at the end of this video in discussing how they test lenses and what they're looking for when they are starting to look lenses. So after this video, keep an eye for that and watch that through if you want to see their take on testing lenses. For me, it was all about just using this on a few projects. I usually like to use these on tested projects. I use it like on a one-day build or something we shoot tested-wise, and then I make my judgment after that. But we didn't really have a whole lot of tested builds to do with these cameras or videos I can do, and so what I ended up doing was just shooting a whole lot of footage while I was out in the elements. I was traveling, doing some shoots, and then I shot a short film over the weekend using these as they are designed, as cinema-style lenses. I wanted to shoot something narrative and cinematic, and so that is what I tested these out on, and that's where I started figuring out a little bit more of what I liked about them. I do actually like that cooler image. I do like the contrast. I'm not hot about the flares. I think I did want to control it more often than I didn't, and then I loved that creaminess of the wide open. I loved the softness that it gave the image. I was actually a big fan of these. I think I'm going to prefer these over the Rokinons in the future, especially from a traveling standpoint. I trust these to be in a bag and take some beating if needed to. And then if down the line, if they need to be serviced, I believe they could be, whereas the Rokinons, I'm not sure. Now, I mentioned the 10mm being one of their newest additions, and it is nice having something in the 20mm range for my GH5. Again, having to use that Rokinon 7.5 was always a bit weird. It's not the sharpest lens, and it does really well for crash cam stuff. We shot an entire pilot with Zoe Bell, and I used these as the car camera lenses. They sat in the dash. It was like effectively the 15 millimeter range, so I was able to get both Adam and Zoe Bell perfectly in shot. But I wanted something a little bit less wide, but still a wide. So the 20 is a great spot, but I also I'm not a huge fan of that bowing, of that distortion. And I found that the 10 millimeter lens actually gave me very little bowing, very little distortion, manipulation. And that's actually that was super nice. That was super fun to work with. I leaned on this lens quite a bit for just shooting life. It's a wide angle, so obviously you're going to have some degree of lens distortion, or barrel distortion rather, from the distance from your subjects. But if you like working with wide angle lenses, I think that the 10 is definitely one. If you're looking at maybe two or three of these lenses to throw into a case or a kit, I would recommend getting the 10, maybe the 50, and the 25. I'll give you a great range. Those three lenses I feel like you could do a whole lot with. So that is my thoughts on the SLR Magic MicroPrime Cine lenses. I really enjoyed my time working with these. I think this is something that is, this will be something that is crucial to my GH5 kit moving forward. I really enjoyed not having to put a Metabones adapter, not having to use full frame glass, having something almost the size of my Lumix lenses. I mean, that Micro Four Thirds ecosystem is so small, the footprint is so unobtrusive, but I am just one DP, one person who works on very specific types of projects, especially within testing. And I thought, if I'm gonna be looking at lenses and lens choices and lens testing, it's best to chat with some other DPs and find out from them what it is that they look for in lens. Alissa Rooney is a full-time director of photography for Adobe and Frame.io. She's also done tons of amazing freelance work as a cinematographer. Kenny McMillan is another Los Angeles-based cinematographer and producer for his company Albot. He also hosts Frame and Reference. It's a cinematography podcast where he interviews tons of high-end DPs. Now, while I sat down and chatted with each of these cinematographers separately, I intercut these interviews into each other for brevity purposes. Enjoy. Types of cinema lenses especially. So I wanted to pick your brain a little bit about your process in finding, I guess, your vision through the lens packaging. At this point, cameras, the higher end cameras, there's only a few people use, and they're great. But it's lenses, I think, at this point where we can start getting some interesting, unique looks. And so I wanted to get your thoughts on this by starting off with, in general, as a project or a production starts off, when you go into pre-production, I guess, when does lensing and lens packages sort of enter into your thoughts?
I feel like it really depends on it's like a project by project basis. I think sometimes I'll read a script and have like a really quick discussion with a director and kind of instantly know the direction for the lensing that we want to go for, whether it's spherical, anamorphic, and vintage or modern kind of. So I think that it really just depends on who I'm working with and maybe a director's vision for the project. Sometimes, it's a little further into the pre-production process that the director and I will figure out what lens we want. Sometimes I kind of know right off the bat, just based on past experiences with lensing, what I want to use for a project. And then other times it's like, okay, I'm not 100%, decided on what we want to use to create the look and tell the story. So I'll go into a rental house and do my tests and kind of figure out and narrow down the selection.
If you're talking like a narrative, you have like a director and there's a script and a story, usually pretty early, because like cameras are more a convenience choice than anything. Like you're either probably shooting Alexa Red or Venice. If it's a different camera, that's usually a budget thing. The way I've heard it described by a lot of DPs on Frame and Reference is that lenses these days are more what choosing your film stock used to be. So lenses are what's going to give you the look of your film more so than anything. So for a narrative, that's really important. Like obviously the difference between anamorphic and spherical is one thing. Like anamorphic tends to be more, let's say, sci-fi or action, or and these are things that are sort of, these are tropes that are set by previous filmmakers, right? There's no right or wrong way to use anamorphic or spherical. It's just what we've seen in the past.
I guess, do you find a variance of directors and how involved they are in those choices? Or is there some projects where you're sort of given free reign, or some where directors are very adamant on wanting a specific look?
Yeah, it varies dramatically, how much direction a director will give based on the project that they're going for. Some directors I'll have actually send me a link to a lens they want to use. and will use it. And others have absolutely no idea about lenses and kind of just want me to bring whatever to the table. A lot more often than not, my experience has been that directors don't really know what they want. And so a lot of the time I'll either test or pitch a lens that I'm looking to shoot on. And more often than not, they're super gung-ho about it and they end up loving them. So my experience has been pretty simple, I feel like, through the years. And I feel like a lot of the time the director usually trusts me more often than not. I've only had a couple of instances where I've been given a lens that they want to shoot on, but that could be for whatever reason. You know, they've seen it shot, they've seen someone else shoot on it and they like the look a lot, or whatever. And the people specifically that had a lens in mind for me were very technically oriented and knew kind of what they wanted from that lens. So I was super happy to give that to them, and it was fun. I had never shot on that particular lens, so it was fun to try something new out and give them what they wanted.
There are trends that happen in lenses, right? I mean, I feel like we saw that really sharp, like just you wanted the perfect resolution. As camera resolution started to jump up, like going from 1080 to 4K to 6K, like everyone wanted super clean images. And then I feel like at some point, having some flawed stuff come back into these lenses as a feature, not a bug, it's starting to become the trend again.
I actually slightly disagree. It was kind of offset. When we had crappier sensors, people wanted nicer lenses to compensate. And then the second we got digital, with let's say sharp, the Alissa.
Yeah. Do you have like one or two that sit high up in your preference in terms of lenses that you sort of go to and then move around from there?
I don't have a favorite or go-tos, but there's some that I've used multiple times just because I know the look and I love the look depending on the project. And so usually that's like, I love old fast glass Cineovisions. It's like a vintage anamorphic. Those are always beautiful, or they're Todd AOs. Those are like the more extreme vintage anamorphic looks to me, but I'm a big fan of that pretty insane character that they bring, and always make for really interesting looking images. And then almost anything Panavision, obviously, because all of their anamorphics, the C's, are beautiful. Probably a lens. If I could only choose one to ever shoot on, again, that would probably be one of my first choices. That, and then at Frame.io and Adobe, we shoot a lot of Panavision Artistes, which are stunning as well. It's like a spherical, a modern spherical lens it's kind of based on vintage glass. So
I mean, your work has a lot of style to it. So I'm guessing you do prefer a lens with a little bit of character, a little bit of style.
Yeah, I always kind of push probably more style than there should be. I'm always, a lot of times, like I'll even layer like filtration on top of the glass. It kind of just depends. I've gone in and out of like experimenting with no filtration and adding filtration even on top of vintage glass. I feel like a lot of my projects are fairly stylized and dramatic. So a lot of that comes from vintage glass, and have gone back and forth playing with anamorphic and spherical, and even just over the years finding what I like about both and how I see them fit for particular projects.
As Matthew Duclos, good friend of mine.
They do Duclos lenses.
Yeah, Duclos Lenses is his company. He rehouses and services cinema lenses. What he said was, there's no bad lens. There's only the right lens for the right job. And in the same way, there shouldn't be any confusion about which lens you pick because it's just what you like. And something I talk more and more about is that, the technically correct that I think a lot of the internet gets absorbed with is day one, page one of filmmaking. Is it in focus? Do we have a high enough resolution for the deliverable, blah, blah, blah. But really what you're going for at the end of the day is how the image makes you feel. And that's not something you can really quantify. So when you're looking at lenses, it's kind of like, does this make you feel the way you want the audience to feel when they view your content? And that part of that's lenses, part of that's color, part of that's lighting, but that's one element of the package.
So going back to lens, like the whole testing aspect of these things. I mean, for me, whenever I'm messing with the stuff in-house at Tested, it's mostly I'm bringing a lens that we just got onto one of our projects and shooting it out and seeing what it does. But oftentimes we're either shooting like a run and gun, or we're not presented with all the, like I was shooting with some lenses that looked clean inside of a shop. And then once I got out to ambient light or I got some like light hitting the glass, it was flaring in ways that I wasn't even anticipating. So I guess, what is your process for testing out a lens? Is it more of the going into the lab and shooting out charts and like a checklist of things, or is it bringing it outside and just messing with it?
I personally, so my favorite place to go is Old Fast Glass, mostly because they have a testing area that is kind of true to life. It has, I don't know if you've ever been there, but they have an upstairs testing spot where they have couches, lamps, production design, blue walls, windows coming in. To me, like, I can't personally really make a decision on the lens if I'm staring at a focus chart and a white wall, or even a face in front of it. Like, I'm just not seeing characteristics that I am looking for, like the bokeh as much, unless you have Christmas lights. I can't, even just like how fast the focus falls off. If you just have the white walls behind, it's a little hard to tell. So if there's texture and color and production design happening behind a subject, and I can light the subject a little bit, I can flare the lens if I want to. It just gives me a much more clear idea of what that lens is doing. And so that's my favorite place to go check things out. And I feel like I get an authentic representation of what the lens is kind of conveying. And I never go in really with a checklist. I'm kind of just looking at a few specific things for myself, and kind of making a decision based on those things.
I went out and did a lens test with my friend Johnny Durango. He's another great DP. We went over to Keslow, and he had about 4 sets of lenses that he wanted to test out for this movie he's shooting. And so I got to sit in, and we just kind of sat behind the camera and talked about it. And it was one of those lens tests you're talking about with the twinkle lights in the background, and we had an actor and color charts and stuff. And really all we were doing was putting the different lenses on and verbalizing notes. It was very unspecific. We'd tilt the camera back and forth and we'd be like, oh, we like the flare on that one. Ooh, that's too much. And he knows what conditions he's going to be filming in for that movie. So he'll know, like, oh, I can't get away with maybe this angle or this focal length because we'll be in, let's say, too tight of a situation, or maybe we'll have too many lights that are going to be in the shot, so we don't want all this veiling glare or anything like that, or if you're kind of an indie person and you don't know what you're looking for, maybe it is better to just go shoot it. There's kind of a combination of both, but when you're doing those tests that you're talking about, you're generally comparing and contrasting and looking for something specific that you sort of know to look for.
Thank you to Alissa, Rooney, and Kenny McMillan. You can find more info about them in the description below. My name is Joey Fameli, and thank you for watching.